Hello and welcome to CultureCast. I'm Laura.
I'm Frances.
I'm Miranda.
I'm Jackie.
I'm Daphne.
Today we'll be discussing the absurdist satire The American Dream by Edward Albee.
While we discuss the play, keep in mind what you think when you hear the words The American Dream. Also think about if you view the American Dream as a good thing or a bad thing, and how you can relate your own definition to the play.
Let's start off with some information on our playwright. Edward Albee is a 20th century American playwright who basically took the theater world by storm in the 1960s. But even before he put his pen down to paper, Albee was surrounded by theater. His adopted parents owned several theaters and were heavily involved with their management. Because of this, his home was always filled with actors, and he was raised in the theater world from a very early age. Although he was surrounded by theater, which he loved, Albee's childhood was not an easy one. His mother was cruel and domineering, while his father was simply complacent or cowardly. The adoption of him into the family was hard for both himself and his parents, and this is evident through his writing. He took a lot of character inspiration from his difficult family life and modeled many characters after the influences of his parents. To summarize the play, it first starts out with just Mommy and Daddy sitting down on opposite ends of the room talking to each other. They're complaining about the lateness of these visitors they're supposed to be having, and they are aggravated because they feel like people do this all the time these days. Then Mommy goes into a tirade about buying a new hat and liking the color of it until someone ridicules it. That makes her embarrassed, so she goes back to the store and makes a scene until she gets a new hat. At this point, Grandma enters the room carrying these carefully wrapped boxes that she dumps on the floor and refuses to talk about them. As the doorbell rings, Grandma is concerned that the band people are coming, but Daddy answers and Mrs. Barker comes in. Mommy leaves to get Mrs. Barker some water, and Grandma tells a story about Mommy and Daddy's previous adoption process, purchasing their bundle of joy and then wanting to get their money back from the agent because it wasn't what they wanted. Then the young man enters, and he begins to explain his life and how he is left without empathy and feeling. She sees him as the solution for Mommy and Daddy's problems, so she introduces him as the band man and then leaves. Mommy and Daddy are happy with their solution, and Grandma ends the play saying that it should stop as everyone has what they want.
This play is considered absurdism, which is evident in its overtly dramatic reactions of trivial events or inappropriately nonchalant reactions to issues of great importance. An example would be when Miss Barker comes in and takes off her dress. It's something that is so strange, but is reacted to very lightly in the play by other characters. This is something no one would ever do in a situation. This part also exhibits another characteristic of absurdism with the irrational and sometimes illogical parts. Absurdism is known for devaluing morals and ethics, which can be seen through all of the characters' lack of pity and sympathy towards almost everything. For example, Mommy and Daddy show no sympathy for Grandma, as they frequently criticize her age and threaten to send her away with the van man. Also, in absurdism, the characters themselves are symbols for the world at large, which leads us into characterization, and we'll touch on this more when we get to symbols.
There is not one set main character for The American Dream. It has been argued that Grandma is the protagonist, and I agree. She deals with the struggles of being an old person and often talks about how social intercourse will be her violent fertility. If anything, what makes Grandma the protagonist is Mommy being the antagonist. Mommy, let's face it, is a user. She uses her husband for the money, uses her power over her husband to get what she wants, and uses Grandma's poor life to make up excuses of why she can use Daddy. She constantly threatens Grandma, telling her that she will call the van man, and the two persistently fight as Daddy, the coward who relies on his wife to tell him that he is masculine, sits in the corner until told what to do. While these are the three main characters, we also see two more, Mrs. Barker and the young man. Mrs. Barker and Mommy have a petty friendship where they will insult one another but let bygones be bygones simply because Mrs. Barker's status of being chairman of her women's club. Mrs. Barker is a whimsical, naive woman who will strip out of her dress, decide to smoke, then not, and be extremely oblivious when Grandma tells her why she's at the house. In other words, she would be casted as a blonde. What we do know as the audience is that she is called by Mommy and Daddy to give back the money they spent on their adopted child since she runs the adoption agency. The young man, however, is the deeper of all five characters. He enlightens the reader of the conflict after Grandma's story, putting two and two together as he describes the lost twin, otherwise known as Mommy and Daddy's bundle. He cannot love with his body, including his groin and hands. He claims that he can only use his body to gain money because he knows they will love him, but he will never be able to feel anything towards them.
Now let's talk about the use of settings. As the play starts out, Mommy and Daddy are sitting on opposite ends of the room in separate chairs. They don't ever really move any closer to each other, and this parallels the lack of real communication between the two. Their conversations are pretty meaningless and devoid of true human emotion like the space between them. Also, the play takes place in one part of the house, basically in one scene. This shows that within the family, all that is important is what is visually shown to the public, and anything beyond that is irrelevant.
The play is told from third person, except when Grandma breaks character and acts as the director from a first-person point of view. Towards the end, Grandma leaves the stage but sneaks around and tells the audience, so let's leave things as they are right now, while everyone's happy, while everybody's got what he thinks he wants. Good night, dears. And it honestly leaves the reader, and for me personally, with an eerie feel and very curious as to what's going to happen next. I think this is a very powerful technique because it leaves Albie's audience with something to think about and to a point a little unsatisfied, which is funny since satisfaction is the main theme in this play.
This play is a satire and comments on society, so the tone is often comic due to the absurd language. And this is usually paired with silly and crazy antics of characters like Mommy. For example, Mommy's story about the hat. The play at this point is funny because Mommy is being absurd about the color of her hat, and the play is making fun of her for being so particular. Hence, a comic tone. However, this lighthearted tone is sometimes paired with very serious and even darker subject matter. For example, the grandma story about the buffalo. This creates a tone that is still laughable due to the language, but instead of being about the color of a hat, they are talking about mutilating a child. This can make the audience confused on how to feel about the play. It is like hearing a song for the first time, and it sounds happy and it makes you... It is like hearing a song for the first time, it sounds happy and makes you smile. But upon listening to the song again, you notice the song is actually very serious, and the lyrics are much darker than the tone lets on. In the play, this back and forth between humor due to sheer absurdity and making fun of someone, and dark humor where the characters seem nonchalant about serious issues, creates an overall tone that is like frustrating comedy. You also see pauses and absence of words that further cause frustration to the overall satiric tone.
While gestures and actions are just as important to dialogue, the language takes all when creating a satire. The absurdity of language is what makes it a frustrating comedy. Let's read a line from the hat scene, and just don't tell me that this isn't ridiculous. So I went right back into that hat shop and I said, "Look here, what do you mean selling me a hat that you say is beige when it's wheat all this time? Wheat! I can tell beige from wheat any day of the week, but not in this artificial light of yours. They have artificial light, Daddy." As the audience, we laugh because this woman is clearly out of her mind. But we can also relate. We have stories we find important and we want people to pay attention, so her asking Daddy to restate her words is relatable, especially to couples today. All in all though, wheat versus beige? Really? But Albie is genius when writing his play. The words that come out from each of the characters' mouths equate to not only their personality, but in times their goals. Mommy constantly forms harsh or mocking dialogue in order to get Daddy to do what she wants, to anger Grandma, and at times order Mrs. Barker around. The audience can expect her character to not only emit violent strings of words and bitchy contradictions. Daddy's mumbling and worrying is the cause of Mommy's banter, and to me personally, this aroused anger from the inside. Grow a pair and tell the woman no once in a while. Grandma, on the other hand, speaks her mind and at times breaks the fourth wall, talking to the audience directly to speak of old people. The idea is lack of communication. Albie is poking fun at the American society, saying we are terrible at talking with one another.
Albie includes several judgments in the play. The most important judgment is on the old people in society. The characters point to the fact that the elderly are disposable. They are too old to have anything relevant to say anymore. This idea can be seen the most through the way Mommy treats everything that Grandma says. She belittles it, and she advises their guests not to pay her any attention. There also are a few social rules. Mommy is seen as the dominant and Daddy is the submissive. Oftentimes, Daddy needs Mommy to emasculate him in order for him to man up and do what needs to be done. At the same time, she has this electric collar for Daddy. What Mommy says, Daddy does. It gets to the point where Daddy is basically asking for Mommy's approval for everything he has done and will do. This can be seen when Mrs. Baker knocks on the door and Daddy is reluctant to answer. Daddy seeks Mommy's approval and Mommy happily complies. She tells him that he made the right choice and now he must show them that he means business.
some motifs or main ideas that stick out. The most prominent is the idea that delusions mask reality, which is directly related to the second point of how modern life may be seen as all well and good on the surface, but beneath is violence and unhappiness. The family seems like the typical American family, but in reality their home is quite dysfunctional, as seen by the interactions especially between Mommy and Daddy, and Mommy and Grandma. Another is the fact that Mommy and Daddy appear to have killed the child they adopted. Another important motif is the obsession with youth culture and the rejection of older generations. Mommy and Daddy constantly belittle Grandma. At the time this was written, JFK was elected as the youngest president, and youth culture was emerging drastically. They were seen as prosperous compared to older people in society who didn't have much to offer. The last motif is overbearing wives who have complete control over their husband, a stereotype still relevant today. Mommy exhibits this in her demanding tone when she talks to others and orders around Daddy. As mentioned before, this play is absurdist, and one main aspect of absurdist play is that characters themselves are symbols. The main character symbol in this play is the young man who is a symbol of the American dream. He is perfect on the outside, as he says himself, clean-cut, Midwest farm boy type, almost insultingly good-looking in the typical American way. Good profile, straight nose, honest eyes, wonderful smile. But this appearance masks his incomplete outside. He has to compensate for his emptiness with his looks, which criticizes much of the American way of life. Another symbol is the boxes that Grandma brings onto the stage and the young man takes away at the end. These boxes are described as neatly wrapped and are mentioned as bothersome by Daddy and Mommy. At the end, Grandma lists off what's in the boxes. Some are physical objects, others are things like a couple of regrets and 86 years old. This is another symbol of violence and ugliness of reality tied up neatly in a little box that looks good on the outside. Previously covered in another podcast, we talked about how Death of a Salesman is a tragic take on the American life. The American dream, however, takes the same idea, the ideal American life, and turns it into satire. Obviously, Death of a Salesman is tragic, and exponentially more realistic, but both have main themes of what's beneath the surface is a lot worse than what's on the outside. The American dream, although a satire, still takes on a darker view. However, it is a comedy. This comedy is also shown through the joyful ending, or komos as it's called in traditional Greek comedies. However, it's done so quite out of context and satirical because Grandma breaks the fourth wall to ensure that there's a happy ending. Otherwise, it can be assumed the ending to their stories would not be the typical American dream.
Sometimes the American dream can be a positive thing. Some claim that the American dream is like having a perfect life and a happy family, a great job, etc. It is something to strive for. On the other hand, some think the American dream is a bad thing. Albie is saying that he believes the American dream is something that is just that, a dream. He believes that in order to attain this ideal perfection that is the American dream, one must alter themselves so much that they reach a point where they are no longer human.